Diane Ochoa pulled into the parking lot of the Carrizo Inn at 9:15 on a Tuesday night in November. She was 11 hours into a 12-hour drive from Albuquerque to a clinic in Page, Arizona, where she'd been contracted for a 3-week nursing rotation, and her eyes were doing that thing where the road lines started to double. She needed to stop. She needed 4 hours of sleep and a bed that wasn't the back seat of her Corolla. The hotel sat at the base of a mesa that she couldn't fully see in the dark, just a black shape that blocked the stars along the southern horizon, like something had taken a bite out of the sky. The building itself was long and low, the kind of motor lodge that used to line every highway in the Southwest, before the interstates pulled all the traffic away. A neon sign flickered near the road. Half the letters were dead. What remained spelled out CRRZOIN in a pale, sickly orange. There were no other cars in the lot. Diane almost kept driving. Something about the emptiness felt intentional, like the building had been cleared out rather than simply unvisited. But her hands were trembling on the wheel from exhaustion, and the next town was another 40 minutes. And she told herself that she was a grown woman who had worked night shifts in emergency rooms, where people came in with things she still couldn't talk about at dinner parties. She could handle a quiet motel. The woman at the front desk was pleasant. Dark hair, tired eyes, a smile that arrived a half-second too late, like it had to be retrieved from somewhere. She handed Diane a key, an actual metal key, not a card, and said room 6 was clean and ready. Diane thanked her, drove her car to the end of the building, and carried her overnight bag inside. The room smelled like industrial cleaner layered over something older and more permanent. Dust, maybe, or the particular staleness that settles into a space that has been closed for a long time and only recently reopened. The bedspread was thin. The carpet was the color of weak coffee. A painting of a desert landscape hung above the bed, slightly crooked, and Diane straightened it out of habit before realizing it had been mounted that way. The hook was in the wrong place, and the frame couldn't hang level. She brushed her teeth. She set her alarm for 5:30. She turned off the light and lay in the dark and listened to the absolute silence of a place that was 40 minutes from anything. She fell asleep in under 3 minutes. She woke at 2:47 a.m. Not gradually, not from a dream. She went from unconscious to completely chemically awake in a single heartbeat, the way you do when your body registers something before your mind has a chance to process it. She was sitting up before she understood why. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn. Nothing was out of place. But there was a light coming through the gap at the bottom of the curtain. Not the amber glow of the parking lot lamp she'd noticed that when she went to bed, a faint warm bleed along the carpet. This was brighter, whiter, and it wasn't steady. It pulsed, very slightly, like something breathing. Diane sat there for a long time. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Time does strange things at 2:47 in the morning in a room you don't know, in a building you've never been to, on a highway you'll never drive again. She got up and went to the window. She parted the curtain 1 inch, just enough to see the parking lot. The light pole was on, normal. Her car was where she'd left it, normal. The highway beyond the lot was empty and dark, normal. And standing directly beneath the light pole, in the center of the parking lot, was her mother. Diane's mother had been dead for 3 years, ovarian cancer. Diane had held her hand in the hospice in Las Cruces and watched the monitors flatten, and had driven home afterward in silence because there was nothing left to say to anyone. But there she was, standing in a motel parking lot in northeastern Arizona at 2:47 in the morning, wearing the blue cardigan she always wore around the house, her hair pulled back the way she always kept it, her face exactly as Diane remembered it, not young, not old, just her mother's face, the one she saw when she closed her eyes and tried to remember. She was smiling, and for one moment, one terrible, airless moment, Diane felt relief. The kind of relief that doesn't come from logic, the kind that comes from the deepest, most animal part of your brain, the part that never accepted the loss in the first place, the part that had been waiting 3 years for exactly this, for the door to open, for the mistake to be corrected, for the impossible to simply happen. Then the moment passed, and Diane saw what was wrong. The arms were too long. Not grotesquely, you wouldn't notice in a photograph. But standing there under the flat white light, the arms hung past where arms should stop. The fingertips reached the mid-thigh, and the head was tilted at an angle that Diane's mother had never held her head at. An angle that no one holds their head at. Tilted slightly to the left and slightly back, as if the neck were a hinge that had been installed wrong. And the smile. The smile was right. That was the worst part. It was her mother's exact smile, warm, familiar, but it wasn't moving. It wasn't the smile you give someone. It was a smile that had been placed on the face like a sticker and left there. The figure didn't move, it didn't blink, it didn't shift its weight. It stood in the parking lot the way a photograph stands perfectly still, occupying space without participating in it. Diane let the curtain fall. She locked the deadbolt. She pushed the desk chair under the door handle. She sat on the bed with her back against the headboard, and she did not sleep, and she did not look out the window again. At 4 a.m, she heard the wind come back. She hadn't realized it had stopped, and something about the return of that sound told her it was over. She loaded her car in the dark. She didn't check out. She didn't go back to the front desk. She drove to Page and worked her 3-week rotation, and she didn't tell anyone what she saw because she understood, on a level beneath language, that there was nothing anyone could say that would make it smaller. But before she pulled out of the lot, she looked at the ground beneath the light pole. In the thin layer of dust that covered the asphalt, there were footprints. Barefoot, the shape of a human foot. But the toes were wrong. They were too long, each one the length of a finger, and they pointed in a direction that didn't lead to or from anything. They simply stood there, as if whatever had made them had arrived from above and departed the same way. Marcus Calloway found the Carrizo Inn the way most people find things now, by accident, at 2 a.m. on a screen. He was lying on the couch in his apartment in Denver, scrolling through a Reddit thread titled, "What's the creepiest place you've ever stayed?" It was the kind of thread that accumulates slowly over years, buried deep enough in a travel subreddit, that it never goes fully viral, but never fully dies either. People wandered in, left their stories, and wandered out. Most of the posts were exactly what you'd expect. Weird noises, strange stains, a hotel clerk who seemed off, the ordinary unsettling texture of sleeping in a place that isn't yours. But 3 posts caught his eye. They were from different users, different posting histories. One was a trucker who had been on the site for 6 years, mostly active in automotive subs. One was a college student whose account was barely a month old. The third was a woman, Diane, though Marcus didn't know her name yet, who had posted once, in this thread, and never returned. Each of them described the same thing: a motor lodge in the Arizona desert, no name given, a figure in the parking lot seen between 2 and 4 a.m, a figure that looked like someone the guest recognized, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who wasn't quite right. The trucker wrote, "It looked like my brother, but my brother lives in Ohio, and it didn't move like him. It moved like something that had watched him move and was trying it out." The college student wrote, "Someone knocked on my door at 3 a.m. I looked through the people and it was my best friend. She was smiling, but the smile didn't stop. It was still smiling when I looked again 20 minutes later. She was still standing there. She hadn't moved, not even to breathe." And Diane, the woman who posted once and never came back, wrote only this: "I saw my mother in the parking lot of a motel off 191. My mother has been dead since 2016. She was smiling. The arms were wrong. Don't stay there." Marcus read the post 3 times. Then he opened a new tab and started searching. He ran a podcast called Liminal, modest audience, around 12,000 regular listeners, enough to cover his equipment costs and not much else. The show lived in the space between true crime and the unexplained, which meant Marcus spent most of his time in a territory that serious journalists dismissed and conspiracy communities found too restrained. He was a skeptic by habit, not by conviction. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in the people who saw them, and he learned that the difference mattered. Over the next 3 days, working from his couch with a laptop and a legal pad, Marcus assembled what he would later call The Pattern, a TripAdvisor review from 2017. Beautiful desert location, but something felt very wrong at night. Would not return, 1 star. A Google review from 2021. Do not stay here if you are alone. I saw someone outside my window at 3 a.m. It was not a person, It was shaped like a person. A buried forum post on a paranormal board from 2016. Anyone else been to the Carrizo Inn in AZ? I don't want to say too much, but I need to know if anyone else saw what I saw. No one had responded. Marcus cross-referenced the details of the highway, the mesa, the description of the building, and found it. The Carrizo Inn, 24 rooms, Highway 191. Currently operating under new management. He booked a room for 3 nights. He told himself it was for the podcast. The drive from Denver to the Carrizo Inn took 9 hours if he didn't stop, and Marcus stopped twice, once for gas in Gallup. Once at a rest area south of Window Rock, where he stood in the parking lot and looked at the sky and thought about his father, who had died 2 years earlier and who had taught him, among other things, that you could tell where you were in the world by how the sky sat on the land. In Denver, the sky was high and distant. Here, it pressed down. It rested on the mesas like a lid. The last 40 minutes of the drive were the ones that stayed with him. The highway narrowed. The towns, if they'd ever been towns, are reduced to clusters of trailers and fence posts, and the occasional dog standing in the road, watching his car pass without moving. His phone lost signal 20 minutes out and didn't find it again. The GPS recalculated twice, both times for no discernible reason, as if the satellites themselves were uncertain about the geography. Then the mesa appeared. It rose out of the flatland to the south like the prow of something buried red sandstone, layered in horizontal bands that shifted from rust to ochre to a deep, almost purple-brown near the top. It was massive. Not the tallest formation Marcus had seen in the desert, but the most present. It didn't sit in the landscape, it occupied it. Everything else, the road, the brush, the sky, seemed to organize itself around the mesa, the way furniture arranges itself around the dominant object in a room. And pressed against the base of the mesa, small and pale and sun-damaged, was the Carrizo Inn. Marcus pulled into the parking lot at 4 in the afternoon. The light was golden and thick and falling sideways across the building in a way that made the shadows lean. 2 other cars sat in the lot, a white pickup and a sedan with New Mexico plates. The neon sign was off. In daylight, it just looked broken. The woman at the front desk introduced herself as Elena. She was early 40s, dark hair, the kind of face that had been pretty in a specific way that exhaustion was slowly generalizing. She smiled at Marcus, and the smile was real, but brief, like something she was rationing. She didn't ask why he was there. She didn't ask if he had a reservation. She just said, "Room 9, and handed him a key, metal, heavy, warm from sitting in a drawer, and told him checkout was at 11 and there was coffee in the lobby in the morning. Marcus thanked her. He noticed that she didn't look at his face when he spoke. She looked at a point just past his shoulder, the way people do when they're listening for something else. He drove his car around the building to room 9. He unpacked. The room was cleaner than he'd expected, but decorated in the style of a place that had been renovated on a budget by someone who wanted it to look cared for, without spending the money to actually care for it. New paint over old walls, a flat-screen TV mounted where a mirror used to be, the original bracket holes still visible, a bedspread with a Southwest print that had never existed in any actual Southwest tradition. He walked the property before sundown. The hotel was L-shaped, 24 rooms, 12 on each wing, all facing the parking lot. Behind the building, the ground rose in a gentle slope toward the base of the mesa, covered in scrub and loose rock and the kind of thin, brittle soil that crunched under your feet like something frozen. Marcus walked to the edge of the slope and looked up. The mesa wall rose 200 feet above him, sheer and red, carved by wind and water into shapes that looked almost intentional archways, ledges, hollows that might have been shallow caves. The wind came from the west and carried the smell of dust and creosote and something else, faint and animal, like the memory of something that had been alive here recently. Marcus walked back along the building. He passed room 14 and stopped. The window was boarded, not from the outside where boards might suggest routine maintenance, but from the inside. Someone had placed plywood against the glass from within the room, and the edges of the plywood were visible between the curtain and the frame. The curtain itself was drawn tight. The door was closed. No room number was missing, but the handle had been wrapped in duct tape once, twice, a third time, as if someone wanted to make sure it couldn't be turned easily. At dinner, a sandwich from the small kitchen, Elena ran behind the front desk. Marcus asked about room 14. Plumbing issue, Elena said. She was wiping down the counter. She didn't look up. Must be a serious one. It's old plumbing. The whole building is old plumbing. She changed the subject. She asked where he was from. She asked how the drive was. She smiled at appropriate intervals. But something behind the smile was closed. The way a door can be closed so completely that you understand the closing is the message. Marcus went back to room 9. He set up his recording equipment, a condenser mic, a portable interface, a laptop with editing software. He told himself it was preparation. He told himself he'd start interviews in the morning. He turned off the light at 11. He lay in the dark and listened. The silence at the Chorizo Inn was not the kind of silence that meant an absence of sound. It was the kind of silence that meant sound had been removed. There were no insects, no wind, and there had been wind all day. No highway noise, though he'd driven in on a highway that surely still carried traffic. No creak of the building settling. No hum of plumbing or air conditioning. Just silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. The kind of silence that felt like it was being maintained. Marcus lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling he couldn't see and felt, for the first time since arriving, that he had made a miscalculation, not about the story, about himself. About his assumption that curiosity was sufficient armor against whatever lived in the gap between what people reported and what people experienced. Nothing happened that night. He knew that because he never fell asleep. He lay awake until the light came back, gray and tentative, through the curtain, and the wind returned with it, and the building creaked, and the world resumed its ordinary sounds as if they had been paused, and someone, somewhere, had pressed play. It was his first night. He had 2 more. Marcus spent the next morning the way he spent most mornings, on location, making calls that no one wanted to answer. He'd collected 5 names before leaving Denver. 5 people who had posted publicly about the Chorizo Inn on Reddit, on review sites, on forums, and who had left enough biographical breadcrumbs for a patient person with a laptop to find. 2 had used first names. 1 had used a handle that matched a LinkedIn profile. 1 had left a partial email address visible in a screenshot. And Diane Ochoa had used her full name once in a reply to someone who'd asked if her story was real. Marcus sat at a plastic table beside the vending machines outside room 12, where the signal was best 1 bar, occasionally 2, and worked through the list. Diane picked up on the 3rd call. She was quiet for a long time after Marcus explained who he was and what he was doing. Then she said, "You're there right now?" "I'm sitting in the parking lot." Another silence, longer. "Then you should know something I didn't put in the post," she said. "After I left, I called my sister. My sister lives near Las Cruces, near where my mother is buried. I don't know why I called her. I think I needed to hear someone tell me my mother was still dead. That sounds insane, I know, but I needed someone to confirm it. Her sister confirmed it. Of course she confirmed it. But she said something else too. She said that earlier that week, the caretaker at the cemetery had called her. An animal had been digging near their mother's grave. Not on it, beside it. A trench about 2 feet long, dug in the night. The caretaker said it looked like a coyote, but the digging pattern was wrong. Coyotes dig in short, irregular bursts. This trench was neat, deliberate, the sides were smooth. And at the bottom of the trench, pressed into the damp earth, was a single handprint. "A human handprint?" Marcus asked. Diane paused. The caretaker said the fingers were too long. She hung up without saying goodbye. Marcus sat for a while, looking at the mesa, which was the color of dried blood in the morning light. Then he called Kevin Park. Kevin had been driving rigs between Albuquerque and Flagstaff for 11 years, and in that time he'd slept in places that would make a health inspector weep. He was not, he told Marcus, a man who spooked easily. He'd once pulled over on a reservation road at midnight to fix a blown tire and hadn't thought twice about it. He believed in things he could touch. He was Baptist, he went to church when he was home, and he did not believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything else that didn't pay taxes. He stayed at the Chorizo Inn in March of 2021 because the next motel was an hour away, and his logbook was about to put him over hours. He checked in. He ate a sandwich from his cooler. He went to sleep. Nothing happened the first night. The second night, and Kevin was careful to emphasize this, that it was the second night, as if the distinction mattered. He stepped outside his room at dusk to smoke a cigarette. The sun was going down behind the mesa, and the sky was doing that thing it does in the desert, where the colors separate into bands: orange, then pink, then a deep violet that bleeds upward into black. He was looking at the sky when he saw the figure on the ridge. It was standing on the top of the mesa, silhouetted against the last of the light. A human shape, arms at its sides. Head tilted slightly forward and as if looking down at the hotel. Kevin squinted. The mesa was 200 feet high. At that distance, you couldn't make out features, but Kevin knew who it was. He knew the way you know a family member's silhouette in a dark hallway, not by the face, but by the shape. The posture, the way the shoulders sat, the particular angle of the head. It was his brother, David Park, who lived in Columbus, Ohio, and who had never been to Arizona in his life. I told myself it wasn't him, Kevin said. I told myself it was a hiker. But I've known my brother for 38 years. I know how he stands. I know that thing he does where he leans his weight to the left because of his bad knee, and whatever was standing up there was doing that. Exactly that. The figure didn't move. Kevin watched it for 10 minutes until the light was gone and the silhouette vanished into the dark. He went inside. He locked the door. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he called David. His brother answered on the second ring, sounding half asleep, perfectly normal, perfectly alive. But when Kevin asked that carefully, casually, the way you ask something you're afraid to hear the answer to if David had dreamed about anything unusual, his brother went quiet. I had a dream I was standing on a cliff, David said, in a desert. I was looking down at a building with a red roof. I couldn't move. I just stood there. And something behind me was holding my shoulders, keeping me in place. But when I turned around, nothing was there. Kevin never went back to the Carrizo Inn. He reroutes through Holbrook now. It adds 90 minutes to the drive. He has never told his brother the rest of the story. Amara Osei's account was the one that Marcus kept returning to. Not because it was the most frightening, though it was, but because of what it revealed about the consistency of the experience. Amara was 21 in 2017, a junior at the University of Arizona, driving with two friends from Tucson to Monument Valley for a photography project. They stopped at the Carrizo Inn because it was cheap, and because one of them thought it looked aesthetically interesting, in a way that would photograph well. Her friends took rooms 7 and 8. Amara took room 5 at the far end of the building. First night, nothing. Second night, the knocking started at 3:14 a.m. Not loud, not urgent, measured. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, then silence for exactly 15 seconds, then 3 more. The rhythm was precise in a way that human knocking never is. No variation in force, no shift in tempo, no impatience. It sounded like a machine, or like something that had studied what knocking sounded like, and was reproducing it from memory without understanding the impulse behind it. Amara lay in bed for the first cycle. She thought it was one of her friends. She checked her phone, no messages. She waited. The knocking came again. 3, silence. 3. She got up and went to the door. The peephole was the old kind, a small circular fisheye lens set into the metal. Amara pressed her eye against it and looked. Standing on the walkway, directly in front of the door, was Kezia, her best friend since the 8th grade. Kezia Mensah, who was in Atlanta, who was at Emory, who had texted Amara 12 hours ago about a professor she hated. Kezia was smiling. Amara's first instinct was confusion, not fear. That was what she told Marcus. She emphasized this, as if the sequence of emotions was important to get right. First, confusion. Why is Kezia here? Did she fly out? Is this a surprise? The smile was Kezia's smile, warm and a little crooked. The smile Amara had known since they were 13 and sharing earbuds on the bus. Then the confusion curdled, because Kezia wasn't blinking, and the smile wasn't changing. A real smile shifts, the muscles adjust, the eyes move, the expression breathes. This smile was fixed. It had been placed on the face like a mask and left there. And Kezia's body was wrong. Not in a way Amara could immediately articulate, but in a way that her body understood before her mind caught up. Something about the proportions, the way the shoulders sat relative to the neck, the way the arms hung perfectly straight, palms forward, fingers slightly extended, like a mannequin in a store window. Amara stepped back from the peephole. The knocking continued. 3, Silence. 3. She didn't open the door. She sat on the bed with her back against the headboard and her phone in her hand, and she watched the door, and she listened to the knocking, and she did not move. The knocking continued for 45 minutes. Amara timed it. Every cycle was identical. 3 knocks, 15 seconds, 3 knocks. The force never changed. The interval never changed. Whatever was on the other side of the door was not growing impatient. It was not trying harder. It was simply repeating. At 3:59 a.m., the knocking stopped. Not gradually, it stopped between cycles, as if whatever was producing it had been switched off. Amara waited 20 minutes, then looked through the peephole again. The walkway was empty, but on the concrete, directly in front of her door, were 2 bare footprints. They were facing the door, and they were deep, pressed into the concrete as if the thing standing there had weighed much more than a person. The footprints were still there when Marcus checked after the call. Faint now, almost gone, worn by 5 years of weather and foot traffic, but visible. He knelt and looked at them. The toes were long, longer than any toes he'd ever seen on a human foot. And the print was narrow, too narrow for the length, like a foot that had been stretched. Dale Whitfield didn't see a face. Dale was 71, a retired geologist who'd spent 40 years studying sedimentary formations across the Colorado Plateau. He'd been to the Carrizo Inn in the spring of 2022, not as a tourist, but out of professional curiosity. The mesa behind the hotel displayed an unusual stratigraphic sequence he'd read about in a colleague's paper and wanted to see for himself. He checked in for 2 nights. He spent the first day hiking the base of the mesa, taking samples, photographing the rock layers. First night, nothing. Second night, he heard his wife's voice. Margaret Whitfield had died in 2019, stroke, sudden and complete. One morning she was pouring coffee. That afternoon, she was gone. Dale told Marcus this without emotion, not because he didn't feel it, Marcus understood, but because he told it so many times that the words had separated from the feeling, the way a prayer repeated too often separates from the belief. At 2:30 a.m., Dale heard Margaret call off his name, not from inside the room, from outside, from behind the building, toward the mesa. Dale. Just his name, in her voice, in the exact intonation she used when she wanted him to come look at something, a bird in the yard, a color in the sunset. Not urgent, conversational. Come here, I want to show you something. Dale knew it wasn't Margaret. He was a geologist. He believed in the observable, the measurable, the reproducible. He did not believe that his dead wife was standing behind a motel in Arizona calling his name. But he went outside anyway. He told Marcus he didn't know why. He said it was like his legs made the decision, and his mind was simply notified. He put on his shoes. He opened the door. He walked around the building toward the mesa. The voice stayed ahead of him. Always the same distance. Always the same volume. Always just his name, spoken in Margaret's warm, unhurried tone. Dale. He followed it. The ground sloped upward. The brush thickened. He could see the mesa wall ahead, a black shape against a slightly less black sky. The voice led him toward it, or he thought it did. He walked for 20 minutes, picking his way through scrub and loose rock, following a sound that he knew could not be real, but that he could not stop following. Then he stopped, because something was wrong. He turned around. The hotel should have been behind him, downslope, its parking lot lights visible. He'd been walking away from it for 20 minutes. It should have been small and distant. It was right behind him, 30 feet away. He could see his room door. He could see his car. He could see the light pole. He'd been walking in a circle, 20 minutes of walking, and he'd gone nowhere. Dale went back to his room. He locked the door. He didn't hear the voice again, but in the morning, he found something on the ground outside room 14. A ring of scratches in the concrete, as if someone had been walking in tight circles for hours, dragging something along the ground. The scratches formed a pattern, not a symbol, not a letter, just circles. Hundreds of overlapping circles, like the grooves in a record. The last interview was Sophia Reyes, and Sophia had something the others didn't: a photograph. Sophia was a freelance photographer from Tucson who specialized in liminal spaces, empty malls, abandoned highways, places built for people that people had left. The Carrizo Inn was exactly the kind of subject she sought out. She stayed one night in October 2023, just one. Because on her second night, and Marcus noted this, noted how every account confirmed the rule, she was standing outside her room at 2:15 a.m., shooting long exposures of the parking lot by the light of the single pole when the figure appeared. It was her father who lived in Hermosillo, an hour and a half south of the border, who was alive and healthy and who she'd spoken to that morning. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot where the asphalt met the desert. He was smiling. He was wearing a shirt she recognized, a green plaid she'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. Sophia raised her camera. Her hands were shaking. She told Marcus this with a photographer's embarrassment, the way a surgeon might admit their hands trembled, but she pressed the shutter. The LCD screen on the back of the camera showed the image immediately. And in the image, the figure was there, clear, unmistakable. Her father, standing at the edge of the light. She ran inside. She locked the door. In the morning, she uploaded the image to her laptop. The figure was gone. The photograph was identical in every other respect: the parking lot, the light pole, the angle, the exposure. But the space where her father had stood was empty. Just asphalt and dirt and the low brush beyond, except it. And Sophia showed Marcus this on a video call. Zooming in on her laptop screen in the exact spot where the figure had been, the asphalt was cracked. The cracks radiated outward from a central point, like an impact fracture. And the pattern they formed, when you looked at it from directly above, looked like the outline of an open hand. 5 long, thin fractures extending from a central depression. Fingers spread wide, pressed down from above. Marcus hung up the phone and sat in the silence of room 9 and laid out his legal pad and wrote down what he knew. The details, the impossible, consistent, corroborating details. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always on the second night, never the first. Always a figure resembling someone the guests knew, most often someone dead, sometimes someone alive but far away. Always standing still, at least initially. Always smiling. Always described the same way, in different words by different people who had never spoken to each other. It moved like something that was pretending to be a person. The face was always right. The body was always slightly wrong. And it never spoke, not once. Not to any of them, except to Dale, who heard a voice but never saw a face, as if they were different versions of the same thing, as if whatever was out there was trying different approaches, testing which one worked better. A face without a voice without a face. Getting closer, each time. Getting closer to the complete thing. Marcus found Ray Yazzie the way Ray probably didn't want to be found, through a gas station attendant 12 miles up the road. A young Navajo man who looked at Marcus for a long time when he asked about the Carrizo Inn, and then said, "You should talk to Ray, but he won't talk to you about that." Ray's trailer sat on a low hill east of the highway, surrounded by red dirt and juniper, and a silence that felt different from the hotel's silence, not held, but chosen. A dog lay in the shade of a water tank and watched Marcus's car approach without raising its head. Ray was on the porch. He was in his 60s, thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same sandstone as the mesa. He didn't seem surprised to see Marcus. He didn't seem pleased either. Marcus introduced himself, explained the podcast, explained what he was investigating. Ray listened with a stillness that Marcus had only seen in people who had spent most of their lives in places where stillness was the default, not the exception. When Marcus finished, Ray said, "I know what you're going to ask, and I'm not going to answer it. I'm just trying to understand. That's the problem." Ray looked past Marcus toward the mesa, which was visible from the porch as a dark shape on the horizon. He was quiet for long enough that Marcus began to think the conversation was over. Then Ray said, "That building sits on a mouth. You don't build on a mouth. The man who built it was told. 3 times he was told. He didn't listen, and now it breathes." Marcus waited. The dog shifted in the shade. "Every person who sleeps there breathes into it," Ray said. "And it breathes back. That's all I'll say. That's all anyone should say. The more you name a thing, the more it knows you're talking about it. And it's already listening." He looked at Marcus then directly, for the first time, and something in his expression changed. Not to fear, to recognition. The recognition of a man looking at someone standing at the edge of something they haven't yet seen. "How many nights have you been there?" Ray asked. 1. Ray nodded slowly. Then tonight is your second. He said it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, with precision, without comfort, and with the understanding that the information itself was the only thing he could offer. Marcus drove back to the Carrizo Inn. The sun was going down. The mesa cast a shadow that reached across the highway and swallowed the building whole. He parked in the lot and sat in his car and watched the shadow darken, and he understood, with a certainty that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with the look on Ray Yazzi's face, that tonight was going to be different. He went to his room. He locked the door. He turned on his recording equipment. And he waited for what everyone else had already seen. Marcus couldn't sleep. That was expected. He hadn't slept the first night either. And tonight, the sleeplessness had a different quality, less restless and more watchful, the way an animal holds still when it senses a predator in the grass. He lay in the dark and waited, but waiting felt passive, and passivity felt dangerous. So he sat up and opened his laptop and did the thing that had always made him feel in control. He researched. The history of the land beneath the Carrizo Inn wasn't hard to find. It was hard to look at. The parcel, 47 acres of scrubland pressed against the base of the mesa, had been the subject of a boundary dispute between the Navajo Nation and the state of Arizona for most of the 1960s. The specifics were bureaucratic and tangled, the kind of legal language that exists specifically to obscure what is actually being fought over. But the essence was simple. The Navajo Nation claimed the land fell within their sovereign territory. The state of Arizona, citing a survey from 1934 that had been contested since the day it was filed, claimed it did not. The dispute moved through courts, it moved through committees. It moved through the offices of people who would never visit the land they were arguing about. In 1971, while the dispute was still unresolved, a developer named Howard Lance from Flagstaff identified the parcel as being in legal limbo, technically claimable under state adverse possession statutes, precisely because its ownership was contested. Lance filed the paperwork. A county clerk processed it. And just like that, 47 acres of land that two governments had been arguing over for a decade belonged to a private citizen who wanted to build a motel. The Navajo families who lived in the area there were four, Marcus found, spread across the surrounding miles, protested. They wrote letters, they attended a county hearing. They stood in front of bulldozers for one afternoon in August of 1972 before a sheriff's deputy told them they were trespassing on private property. But it wasn't just the land rights. Marcus found this in a scanned copy of the county hearing transcript, buried in a digitized archive at the state library. A woman named Alice Nez had spoken at the hearing. She was identified as an elder of the local community. Her testimony was brief and had been transcribed with the particular carelessness that official transcribers reserve for speakers they didn't take seriously. She said, "This land is not empty. This land is a door. It has been a door for longer than anyone in this room has been alive. You do not build on a door. If you build on a door, what is on the other side will come through." The transcript noted that her comments were received and filed. There was no further discussion. Lance built the hotel anyway. Construction began in the spring of 1973. Marcus found fragments of this period, a contractor's invoice, a local newspaper mention, a photograph in the Flagstaff Public Library's digital collection showing the steel frame going up against the mesa. The building went up quickly. Lance wanted it open for the summer season. But there were problems. Small ones at first. Tools disappeared overnight, not stolen, because they would reappear days later in places no one had put them. A generator that ran the site lights failed every night at the same time. Workers reported hearing sounds from the mesa after dark. Not animal sounds, though that's what they told each other. Something rhythmic, something that sounded like breathing, if breathing could come from stone. Then, in September of 1973, a bulldozer operator named Gus Hernandez refused to return to the site. The foreman's report, which Marcus found in a construction dispute file at the county courthouse, stated that Hernandez had been grading the foundation trench on a Tuesday morning when he stopped the machine, climbed down, and walked off the site without speaking to anyone. He drove his truck to Flagstaff and didn't come back. The foreman called him that evening. Hernandez said he'd seen someone standing in the trench, a girl. young 7, 8 years old, wearing a white dress. She was looking up at him from the bottom of the trench and she was smiling. Hernandez's daughter had died the previous year, leukemia. She was 7. The foreman told him it was heat exhaustion. Hernandez said it wasn't. He said the girl in the trench was standing in 2 inches of water. Groundwater had been seeping into the foundation all week and the water around her feet wasn't rippling. She was standing in water that was perfectly still, as if she weighed nothing, as if she wasn't really touching the ground at all. The hotel opened in June of 1974. 24 rooms, a small restaurant that never turned a profit. A neon sign that Lance had custom made in Phoenix, orange and white, spelling Carrizo Inn in letters that could be seen from a mile up the highway. Lance sold the property in February of 1976, 19 months. The sale was recorded without comment. Marcus couldn't find a single interview, letter, or statement from Lance explaining why he sold. The man who had fought a boundary dispute and ignored an elder's warning and built a motel against every signal the land could send, that man simply walked away and never said a word about it. He moved to Tucson. He died in 1994. Whatever he'd experienced at the Carrizo Inn, he took it into the ground. The hotel changed hands 6 times between 1976 and 2015. Each owner lasted a shorter period than the last. The first, a couple from Phoenix, stayed 4 years. The second, a hospitality company, lasted 3. Then 2 years. Then 18 months. Then 9 months. Then the last owner before Elena and Tom, a man named Randolph Kerr from Scottsdale, lasted 11 weeks. Marcus found a single record of Kerr's tenure, a handwritten note in the margins of the property transfer document, scrawled in what appeared to be haste. It read, "I don't know what lives here, but it knows my name." And then there was the 1983 incident. Marcus found it in a microfilmed copy of the Chinle Herald, a small regional newspaper that had ceased publication in 2004. The article was 4 paragraphs long, buried on page 7, beneath a story about a high school basketball tournament. A guest at the Carrizo Inn, unnamed, identified only as a man from Albuquerque, had been found at dawn by a passing motorist, sitting cross-legged in the desert, approximately 3 miles from the hotel. He was facing the mesa. He was unresponsive. His eyes were open. His hands were raw and bleeding. He had been scratching something into the hard-packed earth around himself. Not words, not symbols, circles, hundreds of them. Overlapping, concentric, traced over and over in the dirt with his bare fingers until the skin had worn away, and he'd been drawing with bone and blood. The circles surrounded him in every direction, forming a pattern that the motorist described as looking like ripples in a pond. The man was taken to a hospital in Gallup. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he said only one thing, repeated it 4 times, and then stopped talking again. He said, "It's almost finished." Marcus closed his laptop. The room felt smaller. The walls felt closer. And the darkness outside the window felt like it was leaning against the glass. He found Elena in the lobby at 10:30. She was sitting behind the front desk, not working, not reading, just sitting in the yellow light of a lamp with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes focused on nothing. She looked like someone waiting in a hospital. She looked like someone who had already received the diagnosis and was now simply sitting with it, letting it settle into her body the way cold settles into stone. Marcus sat down across from her. He didn't ask a question. He simply placed his legal pad on the counter, the one with the testimonies, the dates, the consistent details, and slid it toward her. Elena looked at the pad. She read it slowly. Her face didn't change, but her hands did. They unfolded, then refolded, then pressed flat against the counter as if she were trying to hold the surface still. "You already know," Marcus said. Elena closed her eyes. "I've seen it 3 times, she said. The first time was in August, 4 months after she and Tom had moved in full-time to begin the renovation. She'd been taking out trash behind the building, at dusk. The dumpster was at the far end of the lot, near the base of the slope that led up to the mesa. She turned around and someone was standing in the doorway of room 11, 30 feet away. It was her sister, Laura. Laura lived in Connecticut. Laura had never been to Arizona. But there she was, her build, her hair, her posture, the way she always stood with one hand on her hip, and her head tilted slightly, like she was about to say something sarcastic. Elena froze. Not from fear, not yet. From confusion. The kind of confusion that short-circuits your thinking, because the thing you're seeing doesn't belong in any category your mind has built. Then the figure stepped backward into the room, not turned and walked, stepped backward. One smooth, continuous motion, as if it were being pulled by something behind it, its feet sliding across the threshold without bending, its body rigid. The door closed. Elena ran to room 11. The door was locked. She used her master key. The room was empty. The window was closed. There was nowhere anyone could have gone. She called Laura that night. Laura was fine. Laura was home. Laura was watching television. But when Elena asked, and she didn't know why she asked, it came out before she could stop it. "Did anything happen to you today?" Laura paused. "I had a nosebleed," Laura said, "in the middle of the afternoon, just sitting at my desk. It wouldn't stop for 20 minutes. That's never happened to me before." Elena didn't tell Laura what she'd seen. She didn't tell anyone. She told herself it was fatigue, stress, the desert light playing tricks. She told herself all the things that people tell themselves when the alternative is too large to hold. The second time was in October. The third time was in December. Each time the figure looked like Laura. Each time it was standing still, smiling, then retreated backward into a doorway or around a corner. Each time, Laura reported something minor but unusual. A sudden headache, a bruise that appeared overnight on her forearm, a moment of disorientation while driving where she forgot where she was going. As if something was being taken from her, something small, something she wouldn't notice missing. But it was Tom that Elena needed to talk about. Marcus could see it in the way she kept circling back, the way her sentences about Laura kept trailing off into silence that pointed in Tom's direction. "He's different," she said. "He's been different since the spring." Tom had stopped sleeping at night. Not insomnia, he slept during the day, heavily for hours, in a way that seemed less like rest and more like something pulling him under. But at night, he was awake, and he walked. Elena had followed him once, in June. She'd woken at 3 in the morning and found his side of the bed empty and the front door of their apartment they lived in, the converted manager's suite, behind the lobby, standing open. She went outside and saw him walking across the parking lot toward the mesa. His gait was steady, unhurried, purposeful. He walked in a straight line, his arms at his sides, his head slightly forward. He looked like someone who knew exactly where he was going. She called his name. He didn't turn. She called again, louder, nothing. She followed him to the edge of the slope. He kept walking, upward, toward the base of the mesa wall. She watched him disappear into the dark. She stood there for 40 minutes, shaking, until he emerged from the same direction, walking back down the slope with the same steady gait. He walked past her without looking at her. He went inside. He went to bed. In the morning, she asked him about it. He said he didn't remember. He said he'd slept through the night. When she told him what she'd seen, he looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Not confusion, not denial, but something closer to amusement. A faint, distant smile, as if she'd told him something mildly funny that he'd already heard. "I'm sure it was a dream," he said. It happened again the next week, and the week after that. And now it happened almost every night. Tom walked to the mesa in the dark, stayed for an hour, and returned. He never remembered. He never acknowledged it. And when Elena pressed when she pushed, when she demanded he explain, he said the same thing each time, in the same calm, even voice. "It's not finished yet." She asked what that meant. He didn't answer. He just smiled that new smile, the one that wasn't quite his, and went back to whatever he'd been doing. "I want to sell," Elena said. Her voice was flat, exhausted past the point of emotion. "I've wanted to sell since September, but Tom won't leave. He says we can't. And when I ask why, he looks at me like..." She stopped. "Like what?" Marcus asked. "Like he doesn't recognize me," she whispered. "Like I'm the stranger. Like I'm the one who doesn't belong here." She leaned forward. The lamp threw her shadow against the wall in a shape that didn't quite match her posture. A trick of the light, surely. The angle of the bulb, but Marcus noticed it and felt something cold move through his chest. "I think it's already inside him," Elena said. "I think whatever is out there has been walking into him every night, a little at a time, filling him up, replacing him. And one morning, I'm going to wake up and the man next to me is going to look like Tom and sound like Tom and know everything Tom knows, but it won't be him. It'll be something wearing him. And it will be perfect. And I won't be able to prove it. Marcus asked about room 14. Eleanor reached under the counter and produced a key. It was the same style as the other's brass. Heavy, old, but it had been wrapped in electrical tape, layer after layer, until the key itself was barely visible inside its black cocoon. I haven't been in there since March, Elena said. She held the key out. Her hand was steady, but her eyes were not. You can go. I won't. Marcus took the key. He walked down the hallway, the interior corridor that connected the lobby to the rooms on the eastern wing, and stopped in front of room 14. The door looked the same as every other door. Same paint, same handle, same brass numbers screwed into the wood. But the air was different. He could feel it before he touched the handle. A cold that seemed to radiate from the door itself. Not the kind of cold that comes from a poorly insulated room, but the kind that comes from a place where warmth has been deliberately removed. As if something on the other side were pulling heat out of the air the way a drain pulls water. He unwrapped the tape from the key. He unlocked the door. He pushed it open. The room was intact. That was the first thing he noticed. It hadn't been gutted or stripped. The bed was there. The dresser was there. The bathroom door was open, the mirror visible from the entrance. But everything had been moved. The furniture, all of it had been pushed against the walls. The bed was shoved into the far corner, its frame pressed against the plaster at an angle. The dresser was turned to face the wall. The nightstand was on its side near the bathroom door. The television was on the floor, its screen facing down. Everything had been cleared from the center of the room with a force and a purpose that didn't suggest a person rearranging furniture. It suggested something making space, clearing a stage. The carpet had been pulled up, not torn, peeled carefully from the tack strips along the edges and folded back toward the walls, exposing the concrete slab beneath. The concrete was old, stained with decades of moisture and settling, gray and mottled. And in the center of the slab, someone had drawn something. Not drawn, scratched, into the concrete itself, with something harder than a fingernail, but not as precise as a tool. The lines were irregular, varying in depth and width, but the pattern they formed was deliberate. It wasn't a symbol Marcus recognized. It wasn't geometric. It wasn't a letter or a word or a sigil from any tradition he'd studied. It looked organic, like a diagram of veins, or roots, or the branching pattern of a river delta seen from above. It radiated outward from a central point, a depression in the concrete, roughly the size of a fist, and spread toward the edges of the room in lines that split and split again, growing thinner as they traveled, until they disappeared beneath the folded carpet at the walls. Marcus knelt beside it. The concrete around the central depression was discolored darker than the rest, almost black, as if something had been seeping upward from beneath the slab for a very long time. He touched it. It was warm. Not room temperature warm, body warm, the kind of warm that living things are. He pulled his hand back. The room was 10 degrees colder than the hallway. He could see his breath now, faintly, a thin mist that dissipated before it traveled 6 inches from his lips. He stood and walked to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was fogged. Not the way a mirror fogs after a shower, evenly, gradually, clearing from the edges inward. This fog was partial. It covered only the center of the glass in a shape that was roughly rectangular, roughly the size of a face. And within the fog, written in letters that were too precise to have been drawn by a finger, and too uneven to have been printed. Letters that looked like they had formed on their own, condensed out of the moisture in the air by something that understood language but had learned it secondhand. 2 words. Almost home. Marcus stared at the mirror. The fog didn't clear. The letters didn't drip or fade. They held their shape with the permanence of something carved. He reached out and touched the glass. It was cold, freezing, colder than the air, and the fog didn't smear under his finger. It remained, fixed, as if it weren't condensation at all, but something that had become part of the mirror itself. He left room 14. He closed the door. He locked it. He wrapped the key in the tape again, and this time he wound it tighter than Elena had. adding layer after layer until the key disappeared entirely inside its black shell. He went back to room 9. He sat on the bed. He looked at the clock. It was 1:47 a.m. His second night had already begun. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed in room 9 and set up his equipment with the careful, mechanical focus of a man who understood that if he stopped moving his hands, they would start shaking. He placed the condenser mic on the nightstand, angled toward the window. He connected the portable interface to his laptop and opened the recording software, and pressed record. The waveform on the screen was flat, a thin green line running left to right, registering nothing. Silence, visualized. He positioned his camera, a small mirrorless he used for supplementary footage, on the dresser, aimed at the door. He turned it on. The red recording light blinked once and held steady. He told himself these were professional decisions. He told himself he was documenting. He told himself that whatever happened, the equipment would capture it, and the captured version would be manageable in a way that the experienced version might not be. As long as the machines were watching, he was a journalist. Without them, he was just a man alone in a room, waiting for something he'd been told was coming. He turned off the overhead light. He left the bathroom light on. The door cracked 2 inches, enough to cast a thin yellow stripe across the carpet. He sat on the bed with his back against the headboard. He pulled the blanket over his legs. He picked up his phone. No signal. The screen showed 1:53 a.m. He waited. The first thing he noticed was not a sound, but the removal of sound. It happened at 2:11 a.m. He was looking at his phone, refreshing a page that would never load, a nervous habit when the quality of the air changed. Not the temperature, not the pressure, the texture. The air became still in a way that air shouldn't be still. The way water becomes still when it freezes, not calm, but locked. Held in place by something, the wind, which had been a constant companion since he'd arrived, a low, dry push from the west that rattled the window frames and hissed through the gap beneath the door, stopped. Not faded, stopped, like a hand closing over a mouth. The insects stopped. Marcus hadn't been aware of them until they were gone, a thin, ambient layer of cricket song that had been so consistent it had become invisible. Now it was gone, and the absence was enormous. The highway stopped. The occasional whisper of a truck on 191, the distant hiss of tires on asphalt gone. The building stopped, the faint creak of the roof, the murmur of plumbing, the electrical hum of the light fixture, gone. Marcus sat in a silence so complete that he could hear his own blood, the rush of it through the vessels near his ears, the wet percussion of his heart. His body had become the loudest thing in the world. He sat in that silence for 4 minutes. He knows because he watched the clock on his phone. 2:11, 2:12, 2:13, 2:14, 2:15. At 2:15, he heard the footsteps. They came from the far end of the parking lot, from the direction of the highway, or maybe from the slope behind the building. It was impossible to tell because the silence had flattened all sense of direction. They were slow, deliberate. The sound of bare feet on asphalt, a soft, flat impact, then a pause, then another. But the rhythm was wrong. Marcus had spent his career listening to people, their voices, their cadences, the unconscious music of human speech and movement. He understood rhythm the way a musician does, and these footsteps didn't have a human rhythm. Human footsteps are irregular. Not chaotically, there's a pattern, but the pattern breathes. It speeds up, slows down, adjusts to terrain and mood and the 1,000 small calculations that a body makes without consulting the brain. These footsteps had no variation. Each one was identical in force and duration, but the intervals between them shifted, sometimes a half second, sometimes 2 seconds, sometimes 4, as if whatever was walking hadn't decided on a speed yet. As if it were trying different tempos, testing which one sounded most like a person. The footsteps grew closer. They crossed the parking lot. Marcus could track them right to left, moving along the front of the building, passing room 12, room 11, room 10. They stopped outside room 9. Marcus didn't breathe. He was aware of this, aware that he had stopped breathing, that his lungs were full and his chest was locked and his body had made a decision that his mind hadn't authorized. He sat on the bed in the dark and listened to the silence outside his door, and he did not breathe. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20. Then the footsteps moved again. 3 more steps, not toward the door, not away but laterally, toward the window.
They stopped directly outside the glass. Marcus looked at the window. The curtain was drawn. The parking lot light bled through the fabric in a faint amber wash. He could see the shadow of the window frame on the curtain. Nothing else, but he could feel it. The way you can feel someone staring at you across a room. The way you can feel the weight of attention, not metaphorically, but physically, as a pressure on the skin, a warmth on the side of the face. Something was standing 3 feet from him, separated by a pane of glass and a thin piece of fabric, and it was looking at the curtain with the kind of focus that doesn't come from curiosity. It comes from patience. Marcus sat for a long time, maybe a minute, maybe 5. Time had come unmoored from its usual mechanisms. His phone screen had gone dark, and he didn't unlock it, because the light would be visible through the curtain, and he understood, without being able to explain how, that being seen was different from being known about. The thing outside already knew he was there, but seeing him being seen by him, that was a different transaction. That was an exchange, and he wasn't sure what he'd be giving up. But he went to the window anyway. He didn't decide to. His body moved the way Dale Whitfield's body had moved when he followed his dead wife's voice into the desert. Legs first, mind notified after. He stood. He crossed the 3 feet of carpet between the bed and the window. He raised his hand. He parted the curtain 1 inch. The parking lot was empty and still and lit by the single light pole that stood 20 feet from his window. His car was where he'd left it. The white pickup was still there. The asphalt was clean and gray and unremarkable. And standing directly beneath the light pole, in the center of the parking lot, was his father, James Calloway. Died October 14, 2018. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in June, dead by fall. Marcus had been with him at the end, had sat in the hospital room in Denver and held his father's hand and watched the man who had taught him to drive and to fish and to listen to people shrink into something the disease could carry away. But there he was, standing in a motel parking lot in Arizona at 2:15 in the morning. Wearing the brown corduroy jacket he'd worn every autumn for 20 years, the one with the torn pocket that Marcus's mother had patched with a square of darker fabric. His khaki pants. His white sneakers, the ones he bought in bulk from the same store because he'd found a pair he liked and never saw the point in looking for another. He was smiling, and the smile was right. That was the thing. That was the thing that Marcus would try to explain on the podcast and fail, would try to describe to friends and fail, would try to write about in the notes he kept afterward and fail. The smile was right. It was his father's smile, the warm, slightly lopsided one he gave when Marcus came home from college. The one that said, "I missed you, but I'm not going to say it because we're not that kind of family, so here's a smile instead." The face was right. Every line, every fold, every sun mark and age spot, and the small scar above the left eyebrow from a shelf that fell in the garage in 1997. It was his father's face, accurate down to the pores, accurate in a way that memory never is because memory softens and generalizes and edits, and this face hadn't been softened. It was his father as he had actually looked, not as Marcus remembered him looking. And that was the first wrong thing, because Marcus should not have been able to see that level of detail from 20 feet away, through a 1-inch gap in a curtain, at night. But he could. Every detail was crisp and present and lit with a clarity that didn't match the flat amber wash of the parking lot light. As if the figure were generating its own illumination. As if it were bright from the inside. Then Marcus saw the rest. The eyes didn't blink. They were open the right width, the right color, the right depth, but they were fixed. They didn't move, they didn't track. They stared at a point slightly above the window, slightly to the left, with the unfocused permanence of eyes in a painting. The hands were wrong. They hung at the sides and the fingers were slightly too spread. Not grotesquely, you might not notice in a photograph. But standing still under a light pole, the hands looked like they'd been arranged rather than relaxed. Each finger extended and separated from its neighbors by exactly the same distance, like the tines of a fork. No one holds their hands like that. No one has ever held their hands like that. And the body was too still. Not the stillness of a person standing. A person standing shifts weight, breathes, adjusts. This was the stillness of an object. The jacket didn't move. The chest didn't rise. The figure occupied space without participating in time. Marcus stared through the gap in the curtain
and his father stared back from the parking lot, and between them lay 20 feet of air and the entire width of what is possible and what is not. Then the figure moved. It tilted its head, slowly. Not the way a person tilts their head, a fluid, muscular motion driven by curiosity or confusion. This was mechanical. The head rotated on the neck like a dial being turned. Degrees at a time. Click, click, click. Until it was tilted 15 degrees to the right, and the smile was still in place, and the eyes, which hadn't blinked, hadn't moved, hadn't changed, were now pointed directly at the gap in the curtain. Directly at Marcus, not at the window, not at the room, at the 1-inch gap, at the exact point where Marcus's left eye was pressed against the fabric. It knew where he was, not approximately, precisely. The way you know where your own hand is without looking at it. Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. His body had abandoned him. His legs were locked. His hand was frozen against the curtain. His eye was open and fixed, and he could not close it. He was held in place by something that wasn't physical, by the simple, annihilating fact that the thing in the parking lot was looking at him with his father's face and his father's smile, and it knew exactly where he was, and it had always known. Then it raised its hand. The right hand. It lifted from the side in a smooth, slow arc, not stiff, not mechanical. Fluid. Natural. The most natural motion it had made. The fingers closed slightly, curling inward, and the hand came up to chest height, and it waved. A small wave, side to side, almost shy, almost embarrassed. The wave of a man who isn't demonstrative, who doesn't shout or run to greet you, who just raises his hand and moves it back and forth and lets the gesture carry everything he can't say. Marcus's father's wave. The one he gave at the airport when Marcus flew home for Thanksgiving. The one he gave from the porch when Marcus pulled into the driveway after the long drive from Denver. The one he gave from the hospital bed, 3 days before the end, when Marcus walked into the room and his father didn't have the strength to speak, but lifted his hand, that wave, that exact motion, and moved it side to side, and Marcus had understood that the wave meant, I'm still here, I see you, I love you, this is all I have left to give. That wave, performed by something standing in a parking lot at 2:15 in the morning, wearing his father's face, wearing his father's jacket, standing with fingers too spread and eyes that didn't blink, on ground that an elder had called a mouth, in front of a hotel that had driven away every person who'd ever tried to own it. That wave, it broke him. Not the wrongness. Marcus could have handled the wrongness. The wrongness was what he'd come for, the uncanny, the inexplicable, the story. He could package wrongness. He could narrate wrongness. He could hold wrongness at a professional distance and examine it with the tools of his trade. But the accuracy was something else. The accuracy meant that whatever was standing in the parking lot had reached into Marcus and found the most private, most protected, most human thing he carried the specific way his dying father had said goodbye and had reproduced it. Perfectly, without error, without exaggeration. The way a mirror reproduces a face. The way an echo reproduces a voice. It hadn't taken his father's form to frighten him. It had taken his father's form to show him what it could do. Marcus let the curtain fall. He stepped back from the window. He sat on the bed. He pulled his knees to his chest, a posture he hadn't adopted since childhood, since thunderstorms in the house on Maple Street, since his father would come into his room and sit on the edge of the bed and not say anything. Just be there. Just be present. And the presence was enough. He did not look out the window again. He sat in the dark and he listened. The footsteps didn't resume. There was no knock on the door, no voice, no sound at all. Just the silence, that enormous, maintained, predatory silence, pressing against the building like deep water. He sat for 1 hour and 45 minutes. At 4 a.m., exactly 4 to the minute, as if a switch had been thrown, the wind came back. It arrived all at once, a gust from the west that rattled the window frame and pushed dust under the door, and sounded to Marcus like the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. Because the wind meant the world was moving again. The wind meant time had resumed. The wind meant that whatever had been holding everything still had released its grip, had retreated, had pulled back into whatever space it occupied when it wasn't standing in parking lots wearing the faces of the dead. The insects returned. A truck passed on the highway. The building creaked, the plumbing murmured. The world filled back in, sound by sound, layer by layer, like water flowing back into a drain pool. Marcus looked at the recording software on his laptop. The waveform showed exactly what he expected. From 2:11 to 4 a.m., 1 hour and 49 minutes, the microphone had recorded perfect silence. Not low-level ambient noise, not the hum of electronics, silence. True silence. A flat green line without a single deviation. No footsteps, no wind dying, no wave. Whatever had happened in that parking lot had happened in a frequency that machines couldn't hear. Or it had happened only inside the 1-inch gap between the curtain and the frame. Only for him. Only because he looked. Marcus packed his car at dawn. The light came back the way it always does in the desert. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once. A flare of white along the eastern horizon that burned through the darkness like a door opening in a dark room. One moment the parking lot was black and shapeless. The next, it was flooded with pale gold, and every shadow had a source and every surface had a name, and the world was solid again, measurable, knowable. The kind of world Marcus had always lived in, the kind that made sense. His hands were shaking. He noticed this while loading his equipment into the trunk, the way the condenser mic rattled against the inside of its case, the way the laptop power cable took 3 attempts to coil because his fingers wouldn't cooperate. His body was running a program his mind hadn't written. The shaking wasn't fear, exactly. It was aftermath. The physiological residue of something his nervous system had processed, and his conscious mind was still refusing to fully examine. He closed the trunk. He did a final check of room 9. Bed stripped, towels on the floor, nothing left behind. He pulled the door shut and heard the lock engage and felt absurdly that he was sealing something in rather than leaving something behind. He walked toward the lobby to return the key. Tom Marsh was standing at the edge of the parking lot. He was facing the mesa. His hands were at his sides. He was perfectly still, not the stillness of a person pausing, but the deeper stillness Marcus had seen last night. The stillness of something that has stopped performing movement because no one is watching. Then Tom turned. The motion was normal, fluid. A man hearing footsteps and turning to look. His face was calm, his eyes were clear. He looked like a man who had slept well, which Marcus knew he hadn't, because Tom didn't sleep at night anymore. Tom walked to the mesa at night. Tom walked in the dark towards something he couldn't name and came back before dawn and didn't remember. And the only sign that anything was wrong was the dirt on his shoes and the new, quiet, not quite right smile on his face. The smile was there now, small, patient. The smile of someone who has been waiting for you to arrive at a conclusion they reached a long time ago. You saw it, Tom said. Not a question, a confirmation. The way a doctor confirms a test result that was never in doubt. Marcus nodded. His voice wasn't available yet. The shaking in his hands had moved up his arms and into his chest, and speaking felt like it would release something he wasn't ready to release. Tom looked at him. The eye contact was steady and precise and lasted exactly as long as a person's eye contact should last, which was somehow the most unsettling thing about it. Not that Tom was staring, but that he had the duration exactly right. Calibrated, measured. Everyone thinks it's a ghost, Tom said. His voice was even, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather or the price of gas. They think it's something dead that's coming back. That's not what it is. Marcus waited. It's not pretending to be them, Tom said. Your father, Elena's sister, all those people's faces. It's not wearing them to haunt you. It's not trying to hurt you. It's not angry. It's not evil. He paused. He looked at the mesa. The morning light was climbing the sandstone wall, turning it from black to red in a slow, vertical burn. It's practicing. The word hung in the air. Practicing. Such a human word. Such a mundane word. A child practices piano. A student practices penmanship. A thing that lives beneath a mesa in the Arizona desert practices being a person. It watches, Tom said. That's what it's been doing for I don't know how long. Before the hotel, before the road, before any of us, it watches people. And it takes pieces, not physical pieces, behavioral ones. The way you tilt your head when you're confused. The way someone laughs. The way a hand waves goodbye. He looked at Marcus again. The smile was still there. A face, a walk, a gesture, a wave, piece by piece. Night by night, person by person. It's building something. Not a body, it has something that functions as a body. What it's building is a performance. A way of being human that's close enough to pass. Close enough that if it walked into a room, you wouldn't look twice. If it sat next to you at a diner, you'd nod and go back to your coffee. If it knocked on your door, you'd open it. Tom's voice hadn't changed. Same pitch, same rhythm, same inflection. But something behind the voice had shifted a depth, a resonance, as if the words were coming from further inside him than words usually come from. Every guest who's ever stayed here has given it something, Tom said. A way of blinking, a pattern of breathing, a specific smile. And each time, it gets closer. Each time the figure in the parking lot is a little more accurate, a little more real, a little more like the person it's wearing. He turned to face Marcus fully. One of these nights, Tom said, it's going to get it right. It's going to stand in that parking lot, and it won't be almost human. It will be human. Every detail, every gesture, every blink and breath and shift of weight. Perfect, indistinguishable. And it will walk off this property and onto the highway and into the world. And no one will know that it isn't one of us. Marcus found his voice. It came out thin, scraped, like a sound pushed through a narrow space. How close is it? Tom didn't answer. He looked at the mesa. The sun had reached the top now, crowning the sandstone in white light that made the rock look almost translucent, almost alive, as if the mesa itself were waking up. Tom smiled. It was his father's smile, not the Tom's smile, not the polite, contractor's smile that Elena had married, not the tired, practical smile Marcus had seen at the front desk. This was a different smile entirely. It was warm, slightly lopsided. It carried the specific emotional weight of a man who missed you, but wasn't going to say it. It was James Calloway's smile, on Tom Marsh's face. Marcus took a step backward. His keys were in his hand. His car was behind him. Tom didn't move. He just stood there in the morning light, wearing a smile that didn't belong to him, and watched Marcus with an expression of infinite, patient, almost gentle expectation. Marcus turned and walked to his car. He did not run. Running felt like it would change the nature of what was happening, would make it a chase, a confrontation, something with an antagonist and a victim. And he understood, in a way that he could feel but not articulate, that this wasn't a chase. This was a presentation. Tom, or whatever Tom was becoming, was showing Marcus what the thing could do, what it had already learned. He got in his car, he started the engine. He pulled out of the lot. He stopped at Ray Yazzy's trailer on the way out. Ray was on the porch. The dog was in the same spot, in the same shade, as if neither of them had moved since Marcus's last visit. But Ray had moved. He was standing now, not sitting. Standing at the edge of the porch with his hands on the railing, looking toward the highway, looking in the direction Marcus would be coming from. He'd been waiting. Marcus got out of the car. He didn't need to explain. Ray could see it on him, whatever it was. Whatever mark the experience left, it was visible. The way radiation is invisible, but its effects are not. The way a wound can be internal and still change the way a person holds their body. You look the way they all look after, Ray said. Marcus stood in the dirt and the morning light and felt the distance between who he had been 3 days ago and who he was now. And the distance was not measurable in miles or time, but in something else, a threshold crossed, a membrane punctured, a door opened that could not be closed because you didn't close doors like that. They closed themselves when they were ready, on their terms. What is it? Marcus asked. The question he'd come here to ask the first time. The question Ray had refused to answer. He asked it now not because he expected an answer, but because he needed to hear himself ask it, needed the shape of the question to exist in the air between them. A marker, a stake in the ground. Ray was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the juniper behind the trailer. The dog sighed in the shade. Somewhere on the mesa, a bird called a single, high, clear note that sounded like a question. There are things that existed before people, Ray said. His voice was low, careful. Each word placed with the precision of someone laying stones. They don't have faces. They don't have voices. They don't have names. They've never had any of those things, but they want them. They've always wanted them. Since before we were here, since before anything with a face was here. They've been waiting. He looked at Marcus. His eyes were old in a way that had nothing to do with age. That place, that mouth, it's where one of them is closest to the surface. The land is thin there, the boundary is thin, and every person who sleeps above it gives it a little more. Not on purpose, not because they do anything wrong, just by being there, by being human near it. It takes what it needs. A face, Marcus said. A face, a gesture, a way of walking, a way of holding your hand when you wave goodbye. Ray paused. Piece by piece, year by year, guest by guest. It's building something, not a trap, not a weapon, a costume, a suit made of human pieces. Something it can wear, something it can walk around in, something that will let it leave that place and move through the world the way we do. And Tom? Ray didn't answer the question directly. He said, some people are easier to fill than others. Some people have spaces inside them, already grief, loneliness, emptiness. Places where something used to be. The thing in the ground can fill those spaces, and it pours itself in. Marcus thought of Tom's face in the parking lot, his father's smile on another man's mouth, the way it had looked natural, the way it had looked practiced. How close is it? Marcus asked. The same question he'd asked Tom, the same question neither of them had answered. Ray looked at the mesa. The sun was fully up now. The sandstone blazed red and gold against the pale blue sky. It looked beautiful. It looked ancient. It looked like it would be there long after every person who had ever looked at it was gone. Ray said nothing, but his hands tightened on the railing, and Marcus understood that the answer was in the silence, that the silence was the answer, that it was close enough that naming the distance would be the same as naming the thing, and naming the thing would be the same as calling it, and calling it was something you did not do. Marcus got in his car. He said goodbye. Ray raised a hand, not a wave, Marcus noticed. A flat palm, a stop, a boundary. Marcus pulled onto the highway and drove north. He watched the Carrizo Inn shrink in the rearview mirror. The building grew smaller against the mesa, a pale, flat shape at the base of a red wall. Insignificant, forgettable. The kind of place you pass at 70 miles an hour and never think about again. Just before the road curved and the hotel disappeared from view, someone stepped out of the front door. A figure, shaped like Tom Marsh. The right height, the right build, the right posture. It stood on the walkway in the morning light and raised its right hand, and waved. A small wave, side to side, almost shy, almost embarrassed. The wave of a man who isn't demonstrative, who doesn't shout or run to greet you, who just raises his hand and moves it back and forth and lets the gesture carry everything he can't say. His father's wave, on Tom Marsh's body, in the doorway of a hotel built on a mouth. Marcus didn't stop driving. He pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb, and he did not look in the rearview mirror again. Behind him, the Carrizo Inn rounded out of sight, and the mesa stood in the sun, and the desert went on in every direction, vast and old and patient. 6 weeks later, Marcus published the episode. He spent 14 days editing it. Not because the audio was complicated, the interviews were clean, his narration was steady, and the structure was straightforward. He spent 14 days because he kept listening to his own voice, describing what he'd seen in the parking lot. And each time he listened, the description sounded less frightening and more ordinary, and he couldn't decide if that meant he was healing or if it meant the experience was settling into him, normalizing itself, becoming part of the landscape of his mind, the way the mesa was part of the landscape of the desert. Permanent, immovable, always there. The episode went live on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it was his most downloaded episode by a factor of 10. By the following week, it had been shared across 4 platforms, picked up by 2 paranormal aggregators, and mentioned in a newsletter with 300,000 subscribers. He received 340 emails in the first week. Most were what he expected: listeners with opinions, listeners with theories, listeners with their own stories about places that felt wrong. He read them all. He flagged the ones that warranted follow-up. He filed the ones that didn't. 14 of the emails were from people who had stayed at the Carrizo Inn, Every single one described the same figure, the same time, the same second night. The same smile on a face that belonged to someone else. 14 people, spanning 7 years, who had never spoken to each other, telling the same story in different words with different faces in the same parking lot under the same light pole. The 15th email was different. It arrived on a Saturday, 12 days after the episode went live. The sender's address was a string of numbers at a domain Marcus didn't recognize. Not Gmail, not Yahoo, not any provider he'd seen. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained no text. It contained a single photograph. The photograph was a selfie, taken at night. The lighting was flat and artificial, the amber wash of a single overhead light source. A parking lot was visible in the background. The asphalt, the empty spaces, the low, flat shape of a building pressed against something dark and massive. The neon sign was visible. Half the letters were dead. What remained spelled CRRZOIN. The person in the photograph was smiling. A normal smile, a warm smile. The kind of smile a person gives when they're taking a picture of themselves in a place they've been to, a place they know, a place they feel comfortable. The person in the photograph was Marcus. Marcus stared at the image on his screen. He enlarged it. He studied the face. It was his face. Not approximately exactly. His hairline, his jaw, the small mole beneath his left ear, the slight asymmetry of his nose from the time he broke it playing basketball in high school. Every detail correct, every proportion accurate. He had not taken this photograph. He had never held a camera at that angle. He had never stood in that spot. He had never smiled that smile, or rather, he had, but only in private, only in mirrors, only in the moments when he was alone and not performing and his face relaxed into its default, and he looked like himself in a way that no one else ever saw. The thing in the parking lot had seen it, had recorded it, had learned it. And then Marcus looked at the background of the photograph, past the parking lot, past the sign, at the building itself, at the row of windows, each one dark, each one curtained. Except room 9. In the window of room 9, barely visible, half obscured by the curtain, a figure was standing, looking out, looking at the camera, looking at the version of Marcus that was taking the photograph. It was Marcus. A second Marcus, standing in the room where the first Marcus had stood. Parting the curtain the way the first Marcus had parted it. Looking out with the same 1-inch gap. 2 of them. One in the parking lot, smiling, holding the camera. One in the window, watching. And the one in the parking lot, the one taking the selfie. The one with the natural smile. The one who looked comfortable, who looked relaxed, who looked human, was standing in the exact spot where every guest had seen the figure. Directly beneath the light pole, in the center of the parking lot. But it wasn't standing the way the figure stood. It wasn't stiff. It wasn't wrong. The arms weren't too long. The fingers weren't too spread. The head wasn't tilted at an impossible angle. It looked normal. It looked perfect. It looked like a person. Marcus closed the laptop. He sat in his apartment in Denver and listened to the traffic outside, and the hum of the refrigerator, and the sound of his own breathing. And he thought about what Tom had said in the parking lot on that last morning, standing in the light and with a borrowed smile on his face. One of these nights, it's going to get it right. Marcus opened the laptop again. He looked at the photograph one more time. At the figure in the parking lot wearing his face. At the figure in the window watching from his room. He looked at the smile, the warm, natural, human smile. It was perfect. And he couldn't tell which one was him.